Unfortunately, this very public and, I think, calculated distortion of my views about profiling has coincided with a 14-year-old boy's arrest in his school in Texas, this boy Ahmed, who brought what he described as a clock to school. And he is a Muslim boy who is very interested in engineering, it seems, and is a tinkerer and inventor. And he brought some tangle of circuitry to school, which he said was a clock, but his teachers thought it was a bomb, or might be a bomb, and brought him to the principal's office, and he wound up arrested as a result of this. Now, who knows what happened? This story is only breaking today, but now I'm getting hammered for this being the outcome of my views on profiling. So I should say a few brief things about this. First of all, everything I've said about profiling relates to what I think should happen at airports, which is a unique circumstance. Why are airports unique? Well, because when you're talking about a terrorist getting on a plane, you're talking about someone who is willing to die, right? You're talking about someone who is, by definition, suicidal, if you're talking about bringing down a plane with a bomb or by some other means. So if someone's getting on with his or her kids, you have to then think that this is a person who is willing to sacrifice his kids for this cause. Now, that is a rare breed of person, right? And we should be using all available cues to determine how likely someone is to fit that profile. And as I argue and maintain, smart, well-trained people can, at a glance, exercise very educated intuitions about these things. And not everyone is equally likely to be a jihadist, much less a suicidal one at the airport. But again, I don't think I fall outside of that profile, right? If I'm wandering through the airport alone and I'm not recognized to be the vociferous critic of jihadism that I am, hey, I'm as likely as almost anyone, based on surface appearance, to be the next suicide bomber. But Betty White isn't. And no one who looks like Betty White, frankly, is. And until ISIS and Al-Qaeda successfully recruit people who look like Betty White, I think gradations of suspicion are perfectly appropriate here. But things change when you're talking about schools. Now we're not necessarily talking about suicidal terrorism. We're talking about incidents that more resemble the kinds of things we have learned, unfortunately, to worry about at schools. We're worried about mass shootings, for the most part, of students and teachers by students rather often, and rather often by white students. I think probably most often by white students, judging from the news coverage. So if you're worried about the next Columbine massacre, if a kid shows up at school with something that looks like a bomb, I should hope that the teachers and the administration will exercise the same degree of caution, whether the child is white or Arab or Muslim or Christian. The background of the person is totally irrelevant. We're talking about the object they brought with them, which has provoked suspicion. Now, again, I don't know anything about Ahmed apart from the video that I saw of him online. He looks like a perfectly wonderful kid whose interest in science is to be celebrated. But if he brought something to school that looked terrifying to his teachers and he couldn't give an adequate account of what it was, well then, caution was totally warranted, whatever his religious background or color of his skin. And if it looked like a clock, well then, not. I've seen some photos that purport to be the thing he brought. It didn't look much like a clock. But in any case, the idea that racism or bigotry or xenophobia was giving some topspin to this episode, that is, if true, to be totally deplored, right? Again, I don't know the specifics of what happened to Ahmed. It looks on its surface to be reprehensible, but the way in which Glenn Greenwald and the usual suspects are demagoguing this issue and holding it up as an example of Islamophobia or as a straightforward implementation of my views, well, that should come as no surprise. It's totally dishonest, and it's quite damaging to our conversation about very hard issues. How we deal with our security concerns going forward is a very difficult issue. It's difficult politically, it's difficult ethically, it's difficult practically, and it is only made more difficult by this kind of obscurantism. So, I think that's all I have to say about that. Of course, I'm painfully aware that many of you find this incredibly boring. You can't believe how boring I find this. And I'm aware that many of you think it's totally counterproductive for me to defend myself. I wish I believed that. It's not clear to me what to do, but it's pretty clear that silence on my part and just trying to rise above it doesn't work. So, up to the limit of my tolerance and yours, I'm going to have to address these things occasionally. However, on my next podcast, you will learn that we very likely live in a universe where there are infinite numbers of beings listening to podcasts, just like this one, where we didn't talk about any of these things. Though that would also entail a universe where there are infinite numbers of beings, just like us, listening to this exact podcast an infinite number of times. I don't know about you, but I consider that a problem. Let's try to fix that going forward. If you enjoyed this podcast, there are several ways you can support it. You can leave reviews on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you happen to listen to it. You can share it on social media with your friends. You can discuss it on your own blog or podcast. Or you can support it directly. And there are two ways you can do this. You can leave a donation through my website at samharris.org/donate. Or you can try a membership at Audible, the world's leading source of audiobooks, at audibletrial.com/Sam Harris.